Hi, and welcome to Naturally Curious Minnesota. We're still talking winter trees. Today, we're going to talk about these trees. Not all evergreens are pine trees. So, we're going to learn the difference between some of these evergreen trees and learn a little bit more about how to identify a few of them. So, evergreen trees are called this because they keep their foliage or their needles all throughout the year, including the winter time. They can do this because there is a waxy layer that covers their needles, their foliage, and it protects them from the freezing cold temperatures so that their cells do not get ruined by these icy cold temperatures, and they are able to still do gas exchange and still take in water and expel water so that they can continue making food for themselves throughout the year. Evergreen trees are conifer trees. So that means that they have cones on them. You can see here that this tree does have some cones still on them. So what kind of evergreen tree is this? What kind of conifer is this? Well, this is in fact a pine tree. So yeah, it is a pine tree. And the way that I know this is that it has needles that are growing in clumps or fascicles of two or more needles together. So this one actually has, I have a little branch right here. This one actually has needles that come in a clump or a fascicle of 5 altogether. So here you can see that the needles are in a clump of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this tells me that this tree is a white pine tree. So you can actually spell the word white on there. How many letters does the word white have? 5. W-H-I-T-E. The white pine tree has a very distinctive cone. Here's one that I found on the ground that actually has some of the old dead needles stuck to it. So it has a very long shape, and it often has a lot of sticky pitch or sap that's on the tips of the cone right there. You can see that. And this is very indicative of a white pine tree. So there are still some cones left on this tree from last year. And this is one that I found on the ground. Very, very easy identification for this type of pine tree. No other pine trees in our area have cones that look like this. Okay, as you can see here, this is a beautiful tall white pine tree. White pine trees are easy to identify from a distance because their branches grow in whorls around the trunk. Each one of those whorls represents 1 year of growth on the tree. It's an easy way to identify how old that tree is. So a white pine tree has needles that grow in clumps or fascicles of 5, and their branches grow in whorls around a nice, straight, tall trunk, making it easy to identify from a distance. You might be able to spot these pretty easily because of those whorls and the way those needles splay out, those 5 needles, the way they splay out. Easy way to identify a white pine tree. White pines also have that distinctive looking cone on them, that long cone that they have. A lot of other pine trees will have rounded cones. This one, nice and long. So, white pine tree, easy to identify. Okay, not all evergreens or conifer trees are pine trees. This one here behind me, not a pine tree. Let's take a close look at the needles and the cones to show you the difference between a pine and this tree. Okay, first thing you may notice is that the needles are not growing in clumps or fascicles all together. They're actually all the way around the twig, one single needle attached to the twig, not in a clump. And here are the cones of this tree. They are not as big, they are not as long, and the cones are not woody. You don't see any sap or pitch sticking on the ends of the cones. You just see these cylindrical, wonderful little cones. Here is an old cone from this tree. So you can see it's much smaller than the other one, and I can squeeze it a little. There's no pitch or sap that's covered all over it. It's just a little bit squishy. Another clue as to what kind of tree this is is if you can hold the needles, one of the needles in between your index finger and your thumb, and you can roll it back and forth between your fingers, roll it around and around. It's not flat, it's square, and you can roll it, then this is a big clue as to what kind of tree this is. So, what kind of evergreen conifer tree is this? This is a spruce tree. It has needles that come off just one, not in a clump, just one needle all the way around the twig. The needles are square and you can roll them between your fingers. The cones are smaller than our white pine tree and they are not woody. They're a little bit softer and you can squish them a little bit. That tells us that this is a type of spruce tree. So spruces are square and sometimes spiky. If you were to grab this tree, it might even poke you a little bit and you might go, ow, a little bit. Doesn't really hurt, but you might go, ow, a little bit. So spruces, square and spiky. There you go, a new tree. Okay, I've found another conifer tree for us to explore. It's the one right here behind me. We're going to compare this to the two we've already learned. So let's check this one out. All right, here is a close-up look at the branches. So we can see that the needles are not coming off of the branch singularly. They are coming off in clumps. They're coming off actually in clumps of two. All right, here it is. There's a fascicle of the needles. They're coming off, just two of them. You can see they're quite long as well. Maybe you can tell that they're quite long as well, longer than the white pine that we explored. And here are the cones. They are woody, but they are not as long as the white pine tree. They're a little more roundish, squattish, if you will, on the tree. You might also be able to see these small looking cones on the tree. These are the male cones, the ones that will have the pollen. These are the female cones, the ones that will get pollinated from the pollen of the male cones. These are wind pollinated. So you might have a time in the springtime where there's yellow pollen everywhere. A lot of times that yellow pollen is coming from our pine trees, releasing that pollen, spreading through the wind, and getting into these cones here to pollinate them and form a seed. So when these cones are open like this, that means that they've already dropped their seeds somewhere and a new tree, a new baby pine tree is going to grow. The bark of this tree is also a little bit reddish. That's a big clue. Okay, so we know that this is a pine tree, but what kind of pine tree? So we took a look at the needles. They're growing in fascicles of two. They're longer than the white pine needles, and the cone is shorter than the white pine tree. So we took a look at the bark too, and it has a little bit of reddish color. That is a really good tip-off. Based on the bark, based on the length of the needles and how many they are growing, how many in a clump there are growing there, that tells us that this is a red pine. So you can't use that trick of spelling out red in order to identify what kind of tree this is because the needles are only growing in clumps of two. But the bark is a really great indication, as is the type of cone and the length of needles. So red pine tree right here behind us. Across the way from right where this red pine is, I spy another kind of spruce tree. This one is also easy to identify from a distance because of the unique shape of the branches. So this is a spruce tree, so the needles come off singularly. They are square, so you can roll them between your fingers, and they are spiky. The cones of this type of spruce tree are longer than the spruce tree that I showed you before, but the branches are splay out from the center of a tall trunk and the twigs hang down, almost looking like a ski jump or a kimono sleeve, a long sleeved outfit of some kind. So a ski jump or kimono sleeve is a nice way to remember that. But this is a common tree that has been planted all around the Twin Cities area and many other places. This is a Norway spruce. It is not native to North America, as the name indicates, but it is a tall tree that a lot of places have planted, a lot of homesteads have planted to help give it shade, help give your homestead a little bit of shade. So you know that a homestead was somewhere if somewhere in the middle of a field there's this random tall Norway spruce growing there. It's a good indication that there might have been a homestead, a home nearby at some point in the history of the land. All right, I've found another conifer tree right here behind me. Let's take a close look at the bark and the foliage to figure out what kind of tree it is. All right, here is the bark. It is very stripy, does look like it's peeling off, and has a little bit of a reddish tinge to it. If we were to scratch the bark and take a good sniff, it would be very aromatic, a scent I'm sure you are familiar with. All right, here are the needles of this tree. It's blowing around in the breeze here, but you can see that they are not coming up off the twig in clumps or fascicles. They're not even singularly around the tree like our spruce tree is. They look very different. Hopefully you can tell, up close, that we have scales on them. So these needles are scaly. This tree, with its aromatic bark and its foliage that are scale-like needles, tells us that this is a cedar tree, an eastern red cedar tree. The cedar chests that you have are made out of this wood. The wood is actually an insect repellent. So a lot of those old cedar chests are what we put our clothes in, sweaters and things, so that insects will not eat our clothing because there's a natural insect repellent in there. It prevents insects from wanting to bore into the bark and eat up the living tissue that's there. So it's an awesome adaptation that these trees have. Eastern red cedar, scale-like needles. Another way to distinguish conifers from each other is how are they growing? What's the shape of them? So if you look at this tree back here, look at that beautiful shape. Yeah, your standard Christmas tree shaped tree, Rockefeller Center type of tree. This is a spruce tree. They tend to grow full like this. There it is. Tends to grow full like that, looking like a beautiful Christmas tree. If we get up close, we will see that the needles are coming off singularly all the way around the stem and that they are square, and you can roll them between your fingers. Here's a nice look at those needles. You can see that they are in fact coming around the twig all the way around singularly. And at the end, you can see tiny cones that are forming. They'll be ready to go next year. These wonderful cones, getting us more spruce trees. And the needles are nice and thick and nice and square and a little spiky. Beautiful spruce tree. Sometimes spruce trees will grow needle-shaped, like this one back here. So nice cone shape, triangular shape to the tree. That is also a spruce tree. Lovely. Juniper trees or cedar trees, like the one behind me, tend to grow kind of squat shaped, just like that one. Let's take a close look at it. All right, there it is. It's fuller at the bottom, smaller at the top. So what I haven't been able to find out here today are some fir trees to show you the difference between spruce trees and fir trees. Fir trees also have their needles coming off around the stem of the twig singularly, just one. But instead of being square, where you can roll them between your fingers, and a little bit spiky, those are flat. So for those trees, if you were to put it between your finger and your thumb, index finger and your thumb, you wouldn't be able to roll it back and forth. It wouldn't roll nicely. So they're flat, and they're also not typically spiky. Like if you grab them, you wouldn't feel thick, sharp pointed ends. They would just be flat. So firs are flat and friendly. Spruces are square and spiky. All right, so we learned a little bit about evergreen trees. Not all of them are pine trees. They are cone-bearing trees, are conifers. We learned a little bit about pines, spruces, firs, junipers, and cedars. So get out there, use these new skills to help you identify some of our awesome conifer trees this winter, and as always, stay curious.